Morning, everyone. Morning, everyone. It's not good. I seem to have. I know what my problem is. Just a moment. I have to get this mic under control. Okay, so I have the mic under control, I do hope. Um, okay, we are cooking. I've finally gotten this straightened out. Okay, this should be interesting. We're going to talk about the Red Book in the context of Russian thought. Uh, I did take Russian history long time ago, 1968. Um, so I don't know much about Western thought and or Russian thought. And um, it was interesting to me that over the 70 years of um, the Soviet Union, when religion was trying to be stamped out of the environment, um, people kept their churches going in secret. And and then as soon as the Soviet Union evaporated, all the cathedrals were rebuilt within a few years. My recollection is 3 years. It probably took longer than that, but they are beautiful today. So I am reading an essay by Lev Kagai, and I should read his description. So let me go back to that. Okay. Okay. Can everybody hear me? I hope you can. Um, Lev Kagai, Jungian analyst, graduated from Moscow State University in 1991 and received analytic training through the IAAP program in Russian. He is a founding member and training analyst of Russian Society of Analytical Psychology, assistant professor at the Moscow Institute of Psychoanalysis, and has a private practice in Moscow. He has lectured widely throughout Russia and post-Soviet countries. His special interest is a Jungian view on religion, spirituality, philosophy, and culture. He has several publications in Russian. His webpage is www.maap.pro, and his name is Lev Kagai, Khegai. And I'm reading today from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, edited by Murray Stein and Thomas Arst. This is volume 2 of a 5-volume series. Um, so I'm going to read from Mr. Kagai's essay now. The Red Book of C.G. Jung and Russian Thought. In response to Murray Stein's invitation to reflect on the theme of C.G. Jung's Red Book for our time, we created a research group of Jungian colleagues in Moscow. Our meetings took place over the course of half a year. We not only studied the chapters of the Red Book, but we also communicated with people whose creative work it influenced. For example, the composer Grigory Zaitsev created an audiovisual piece based on the Red Book, and the translator and artist Sergei Sergeyev began to do Cyrillic calligraphy and to create his own design for a new translation into the Russian language. These are examples of how, excuse me, it wasn't good. Hold on a moment. I need to uh, address that issue. Um, and I'm going to not bother you with. Good morning, Art. Uh, that's okay. I was running a little late this morning also. Okay. Going back to the middle of this first paragraph, introductory paragraph, he said, these are the examples of how the Red Book triggered a response in Russia, not only in the psychological community. Our group came to the conclusion that the themes of the Red Book are aligned with important contemporary problems, and therefore it found such a resonance in the world, including Russia. In the Red Book, we found important clues that could further our comprehension of these problems. And I hope you can hear me now. I think I turned my mic back on. Okay, historical background. In 2017, we in Russia remember the centenary of the October Revolution of 1917, but put an end to the Russian Empire, which put an end to the Russian Empire and led to the emergence of the Soviet Union. The now century-old events radically influenced the history of the entire world and especially of Europe. In 2017, we are experiencing what might be called an anniversary syndrome in Russia on a collective level. Politicians and historians recalling the events of 1917 unwillingly or intentionally draw parallels with the present day situation in Russia. A political revolution consists in fundamental and rapid changes in the social life of a whole society that arise when the path of gradual changes, path of gradual changes, the evolutionary path becomes impossible. It may be said that through the appeal of the past to the lessons of history, the modern day political elite is trying to answer the question of how to avoid the always bloody and tragic scenario of revolution while implementing necessary reforms in a society. Boy, does this resonate with me right now. Oh my God. Okay. There are several versions of the narrative regarding the causes of the 1917 revolution. Some points bear a resemblance, in my view, to the current situation of 2017. After the abolition of serfdom in 1861, Russia formally renounced feudalism and began to move toward a capitalistic economic model. It was a belated step compared to the bourgeois revolutions in Western Europe that took place in the 16th and 18th centuries. The necessity for modernization was driven by the economic and military disadvantage of Russia compared with the leading European states, which resulted in a series of unpleasant failures in world politics, such as the Russo-Japanese War of 1904-1905. Now, following the collapse of the USSR in 1991, we are experiencing the same need for accelerated modernization toward a global capitalist society. As it was at the end of the 19th century, the problem of modernization is connected with the fact that Russia is a huge country, the largest in the world, and at the same time very heterogeneous in ethnic, religious, and economic aspects. The differences between the center, Moscow and St. Petersburg, and distant regions were extraordinary at that time and remain considerable to the present day. Metaphorically speaking, the head and the tail in Russia always live in different realities. The need for strong state power under such a geographical situation comes into conflict with the task of liberalization for the sake of economic and political development. Unlike the European bourgeois revolutions, which relied on a quite large stratum of economically active people in the population, i.e., free entrepreneurs, this layer in Russia was and remains insignificant. Today, no more than 10% of the Russian population own their own businesses and refer to themselves as middle class. The transition of the capitalist way of life in Europe was connected to the rejection of absolute monarchy and social class restrictions, also to the decrease of the role of religion due to the Reformation and Enlightenment, and to the subsequent emergence of the ideology of nationalism. However, modernization in Russia could not follow this path 100 years ago. Unlike the virtually European lifestyle in the capitals, in remote regions of the country, for instance, in Central Asia and the Caucasus, the medieval way of life was preserved, and some peoples in the far north and Siberia lived almost at a primitive level. In Orthodox religion, as opposed to Roman Catholicism, a process similar to the Reformation did not happen, and the development of nationalism was hampered by the fact that in old Russia and the USSR, the Russians did not constitute the majority of the population, and there was a high frequency of mixed settlements and mixed marriages. All these factors, to some extent, still impede modernization in the 21st century. Russia in this process appears to be in a less fortunate position than, for example, China, where due to the homogeneity of the population, 90% of the people are of the main Han nationality, and the high tolerance of traditional Chinese beliefs, a smooth transition from socialism to capitalism became possible without changing political ideology and without radical democratic reformations following according to the Western model. In China, if China has always perceived itself as an autonomous civilization, Russia, even though it declared its own unique path, has always considered itself a part of Europe and therefore tries to follow European values and models. Good morning, everyone. I'm assuming that you can hear me. In times of crisis, when radical changes in the life of the country become inevitable, a great tension in the collective unconscious finds expression in the activation of spiritual and cultural searching, especially among creative people. The historians have called the prominent rise in art and philosophy in the early 20th century the Silver Age and considered it to be the Russian analog to the European Renaissance. After the collapse of the communist system and ideology and the emergence of a new Russia in the 21st century, the outstanding figures of the Silver Age regained prominence and have been increasingly treated as a subject of national pride and a basis for a new national identity. It was seen that the progress in literature, art, and the humanities in the Silver Age put Russia on a cultural par with other European countries at that time. 100 years later, Russian culture as a whole is again betting on modernization, which encourages creative people to borrow all the best from the world and courageously offer their own ideas. Being a culturally progressive country, Russia in 1917 lagged far behind economic Europe lagged far behind Europe economically and politically, which led to the revolution. Unfortunately, after the October Revolution, many initiatives of the thinkers of the Silver Age were rejected, and many of their names were consigned to oblivion. Nowadays, many studies in Russia are dedicated to this heritage. One has the impression that through the insights of the thinkers of the Silver Age, today's Russia is trying to find a formula for its new identity in the new century. Um, we see similar processes reflected in Jung's Red Book. Jung was a witness to the rise and fall of the German nationalist ideology that underlay the modernization process in Germany. Many places in the Red Book contain Jung's hidden polemic, which Nietzsche and the hero of his youth, who proposed a modernist revision of art and religion, as well as an appeal to ancient German myths that animated Wagner's creative work and greatly influenced the formation of a new German identity. As a Swiss citizen and living in the German-speaking canton of Zurich, Jung felt himself to be Germanic and part of the German culture. Jung thought and sought answers to personal questions, practicing immersion in the Western collective unconscious, especially in its Germanic layer. Okay, so any comments so far? Um, Okay, this is an interesting history, it seems to me, and especially as it's written by a Russian author. Okay, I'm going to read on here. Okay, Russian connections to Jung. Russia and Germany, as neighboring countries, have been in a complex dialectic relationship over many centuries. They were at war with each other many times, but they were often allies too. It is sufficient to be reminded that the Russian Tsar had German roots, and that King Rurik himself, the founder of the first Old Russian state in the ninth century, was most likely a Viking. the Germans and the Slavs, being very similar anthropometrically and even genetically, have different languages, however. In the Russian language, the word German in Russian, Nemetz, literally means not ours or mute, that is, not speaking or speaking in another language. The German lands lie to the west of Russia, and one can say that symbolically, uh, the way to Europe for Russia lay through interaction with German culture. And on the other side, for centuries, the East and the way to Asia for Germany were associated primarily with Russia. Even though Jung did not travel to Russia, he experienced contact with Russian culture in three different ways. First, it should be noted that Switzerland was very popular among Russian intellectuals in the early 20th century. The safety and stability of the neutral state, with its beautiful mountains, its resorts, and low cost of goods, attracted a variety of famous people, including outstanding Russian writers like Lev Tolstoy and Fyodor Dostoevsky, politicians seeking refuge, among whom were such important historical figures as the inspirer of the revolutionary movement in Russia, Alexander Herzen, the father of the Russian social democracy, George Plekhanov, and the leader of the world anarchist movement, Mikhail Bakunin. Vladimir Lenin also liked visiting Switzerland. At that time in Russia, just as it is now again 100 years later, it was fashionable to send children to study in Switzerland. Thus, at Zurich University, for instance, about half the students were from Russia, and in the medical faculty, in some years, their numbers reached 70%. For this reason, Jung could not help but be exposed to Russian culture. In addition, the spiritualism movement in which he took an interest in his youth received a new impetus from Theosophy, which was founded by the Russian medium Elena Blavatsky. Uh, he also heard a lot about the teachings of the Russian mystic George Gurdjieff, whose classes were attended by some colleagues of Jung. The village of Dornach, which is only 60 kilometers from Kuznach, houses the world center of the anthroposophic movements of Rudolf Steiner, where half of the adepts were Russians, including many Silver Age leaders. Just a minute. Sorry about that. I seem to have forgot my nose drops on my way down here, so I'm leaking a little bit. Second source of Russian influence was Sabina Spielrein, who at the age of 18 was admitted for treatment at the Bergholzli clinic in 1904 with a diagnosis of hysteria. Their relationship continued until her departure from Zurich after the completion of her medical studies in 1912, and their correspondence lasted until 1919. Sabina Spielrein can be considered a pioneer of Russian psychoanalysis, combining the ideas of Freud and Jung. She was the first Russian woman psychoanalyst. Later, she worked in the state uh, psychoanalytic, psychoanalytic Institute in Moscow and participated in the work of the Russian Psychoanalytic Society. After the ban on psychoanalysts in the USSR in 1930, she continued her practice of psychotherapy with children in Rostov-on-Don, where she died tragically during the German occupation in 1942. As we know, a lot of research, fictional novels, and a few films are dedicated to the relationship between Jung and Spielrein. Um, okay, that's very interesting. Archifanis that Steiner joined the Masons, and Jung considered uh, organizations like the Masons or um, the Shriners of the Catholic Church as midpoints on the way to individuation because they provided um, basically by going through their levels of membership and revelation of secrets, they provided a psychic ladder for people who were not well organized in their psyches, and uh, and they still do that, but ultimately you have to step off beyond that. Um, So anyway, all right. So the third source was the long-lasting friendship between Jung and Emil Mettner. Ethnically a German Russian, Mettner was the brother of a famous composer, Nikolai Mettner. Having received a lawyer's education, he worked more as a publicist, philosopher, and book publisher. In the 19 in 1909, he founded the publishing house Musaget, which became the center of a new literary trend of symbolism. His friends included such great Russian writers of the Silver Age as Andrei Bely, Vyacheslav Ivanov, and Dmitry Merezhkovsky. In 1914, due to the development of an auditory neurosis following a heated conflict with Andrei Bely, Mettner came for treatment to Jung in Zurich. After a successful treatment, they became friends and associates. Mettner began to practice psychoanalysis, took an active part in the work of the Zurich Psychological Club, and was involved in translating and publishing Jung's books, such as Transformation and Symbols of the Libido and Psychological Types. Jung's son has suggested that part one of Psychological Types was created from almost daily philosophical discussions with Mettner. One could say that Mettner became the first Jungian analyst of Russian origin. There is also the interesting fact that with the help of Jung's friends, among them the Rockefellers, he established a foundation for the assistance of Russian immigrants in Switzerland, which subsidized some famous Russian socialist revolutionaries in Zurich. Uh, is in this way, Jung indirectly participated in the revolutionary events of 1917. Oh my goodness. Uh, okay. Mettner discovered similarities between depth psychology and the Russian philosophy of symbolism. The main ideologist of symbolism, Andre Belli, believed that through an engagement with symbols and myths, philosophers and artists could attune themselves to the processes taking place in the world soul, anima mundi. Uh, this allows them not only to reflect these processes and anticipate their direction, but to some extent also to influence them. This idea formed the basis of his understanding of symbolism as theurgy, 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 a kind of magical practice for which symbolistic art was intended. One of the popular Soviet poets, Evgeny Evtushenko, also expressed this in the phrase that became an aphorism, quote, "A poet in Russia is more than a poet," unquote. A poet in Russia is more than a poet. A creative person is not only a voice of the people, but a strong personality who, through works of art, can influence the course of history. The unique Russian culture, which became the basis for national identity on a spiritual level, was largely created for classical literature in the 18th and 19th centuries. It was characterized by an acute social political orientation, and as such, it was a literature that fostered the reformist movements in society and served as a means of influencing the authorities, which ultimately led to the revolution. This was due to the fact that at the turn of the 20th century, and with general political and economic backwardness in Russia, there was a rapid growth of cities. Suddenly, huge masses of people mastered literacy and literature was their only channel for participation in political life. Andre Belli, therefore, did not overestimate the role of art, ascribing to the poet the functions of the medium, the prophet, and even the spiritual and political leaders. Okay, very interesting. So art, you have a runny nose to it. I think for me, it's still allergy probably, and I think it's allergy to mold, which becomes um, everywhere in the fall when the trees lose their leaves. Okay, reading on. In 1935, in his article titled The Picture of Personality Through Manual Self-Knowledge, which was published in the Festschrift on Jung's 60th birthday, Mettner mentioned Jung's constant interest in Russian symbolists. The poet, artist, and philosopher symbolist were all gathered in one person, which is close to the ancient figure of a priest, narrator, and shaman. These are embodiments of the same archetype. Its activation from the collective unconscious is largely uh, connected to the loss of the dominant religion to meet the spiritual needs of the people in a period of turbulent change when new forms are required. Between 1914 and 1930, precisely during the period of close communication with Mettner, Jung created the Red Book, wherein he shows himself not only as a doctor, but also as an artist, philosopher, and poet. The Red Book is undoubtedly a literary work in the symbolist trend, On the other hand, Mettner found in Jung's psychology what the symbolists lacked, a medical perspective that provided for working through personal complexes would have helped many of them to organize their lives more successfully. Although Russian symbolism was created by brilliant individuals and had a distinct personalistic orientation, proclaiming the important role of the individual in art and in history, Mettner found in Jung's concept of individuation a more advanced type of personality development and a practical method. Active imagination, invented by Jung with a uh, therapeutic and research purpose in mind during the years of close communication with Mettner, has much in common both with the tradition of German spiritualism and with Russian symbolism, which also have common roots and interconnectedness. Okay, see what comments you have. Obviously, um, Jungian psychology does provide um, a spiritual outlet for not only me, but anybody that's familiar with these works. And so it's very interesting to see how it worked in Russia, which is famous for its literature. Um, and so, all right. A search for unity and integrity. In times of crisis, contradictions are exacerbated in all spheres of society, you think? The, this indicates that the former unifying symbols and counterbalancing systems no longer work. So the world needs renewal. The world comes out of a state of equilibrium and balance, and emerging new forms express the attempts to heal it. The crisis of the early 20th and 20 early 20 the crisis of the early 20th and early 21st centuries have much in common. In the political sphere, the struggle among countries and civilizations is intense. The smell of war is in the air. In the spiritual sphere, there is intense searching, religious strife, and the emergence of new cults. In the public sphere, growing social inequality provokes the rise of protest marches. It is, if in the early 20th century, Europe was infected with the Marxist idea of class struggle, now the hot topics are the problem of terrorism, migrants, and globalization. The key figures in Russian philosophy in the Silver Age, uh, the key figure in Russian philosophy in the Silver Age was Vladimir Solovyov, 1853 to 1900. It was his poetic and philosophical insights that became the starting point for the works of the next generation of outstanding Russian thinkers, Sergei Bulgakov, Pavel Florensky, Nicholas Berdyaev, Semyon Frank, and many others. This religious and mystical branch of thought developed as a reaction to the dominance of materialism and post positivism, the attitude that came along with the capitalist way of life. Vladimir Solovyov uh, translated Plato's dialogues into Russian, and it was from Plato that he derived his view of the main task of philosophy, which was to cultivate in the person a type of wisdom in which genuine universal human values, beauty, goodness, and truth, would be inextricably linked. Following Plato and Socrates, he understood philosophy as a deeply personal experience of self-knowledge and not as Hegelian intellectual exercise with abstract categories popular at that time in universities. Close connections to the spiritualistic circles of the time taught him uh, the philosophy that was necessary for understanding his poetic or spiritually visionary experiences. Jung can only be called a thinker in the tradition of Platonic idealism, and analytic psychology can be considered a practical philosophy uh, uh, in the Platonic sense. The Platonic inseparability of epistemology, ethics, and aesthetics revived in Solovyov's teachings and his creative work as a scientist and poet simultaneously finds parallels with the syncretism of Jung's path. A doctor of philosophy, a doctor of philosopher, and the Red Book shows also a poet and an artist. At the beginning of the 20th century, capitalism relied on the ideology of endless scientific and technological progress. Improving living conditions was accompanied by disillusionment with the old medieval religions' worldview centered on God. Possessing a prophetic gift, Vladimir Soloviev, um, like many Russian intellectuals at the time, foresaw the catastrophic consequences of abandoning spirituality, destroying traditional values, and reducing all issues to economic and technical problems and solutions. His philosophy is based on the primacy of the ideal over the material. He tried to connect science and religion through philosophy. Science proceeds through empirical knowledge, whereas the religious viewpoint is based on faith and mystical experience. The following famous phrase belongs to Tertullian, one of the fathers of the church. Quote, I believe because it is absurd, unquote. The unifying mind, or its practical philosophy of totality or universality, most must let me start that over. The unifying mind of, or its practical philosophy of unitotality or universality must reconcile the bare facts of science with the irrational tenets of faith. This intention is very close to Jung's project as expressed in the Red Book. In the chapters on Izdubar, science mortally wounds the old god and the mythological way of thinking. Jung saves Izdubar by hiding him in an egg from which he is born again, now renewed and renamed in the realm of depth psychology. Jung conceived of the psychology as a unity of science and religion, logos and mythos, rationality, and irrationality. However, by giving a redemptive meaning in his enterprise and by trying to heal the split of the collective unconscious, which was the source of the individual neurosis of the people of his time, Jung did not extend his ambitions to the political sphere. Nevertheless, the fascist regime in Germany initially aroused his interest, for it raised the myths of the ancient Germanic people from the shadows and combined mysticism and rationality. So, okay. Yeah. Archiphanus says, all that glistens is not gold. Often have you heard that told. Had you been as wise as bold, young in limbs, in judgment old, your answer had not been inscrolled. Interesting. Uh, is that a quote from somebody? Aquinas, that's very good. Okay. As usual, at this point in my reading, I'm getting a bit hypnotized. So I'm going to try to get through this next segment of this. Um, Not sure I can finish it today because it has, well, maybe it's only a few pages. All right. Jung was a strong individualist and suspicious of the collective, not placing any special hopes on the political or social activity of the masses. Soloviev, on the contrary, supported the specifically Russian religious concept of positive collectivity, sobernost, which in his time was vigorously promoted by patriotic Slavophiles. On its basis, he wanted to implement the third element of his project of unitality, theocracy, which would complement theosophy and theurgy, completing the union of man and God on all three levels: external, internal, and sacred. So Sodolovsky, in his reflection, followed the same path as Plato, hoping for the literal organization of a utopia on earth. The Russian thinker imagined an ideal Christian state where contradictions among the government, the people, and God would be removed. Undoubtedly, the archetype of utopia expressed in the great Christian dream of the kingdom of God was uh, behind the active social democratic movement in Russia at that time, which in the end gave rise to the 1917 revolution. In addition, Solovyov, Solovyov um, hoped that Christianity itself would overcome its schisms and achieve economical unity. Being orthodox but not meeting with understanding in the circles of the Russian clergy. He he saw Confucianism as he saw Confucian. I'm sorry. He saw Catholicism as a more promising center for such unification. Okay, see if I can get to the end of this paragraph. Um, Jung also respected Catholicism, in which the sacred symbols and rituals necessary for expressing the spiritual needs of believers were preserved. Although the Red Book contains many references to pagan mythology, ancient Greek, and although the Red Book contains many references to pagan mythology, ancient Greek, and ancient Germanic, and several references to Eastern teachings, Jung considered himself a Christian. After interacting with Istvar, he devoted several chapters of the Red Book to the Imitation of Christ, the work of Thomas Kempis, Catholic monk of the 13th century, I think, 15th century. 15th century. This author, like Jung and Soloviev, uh, saw the task of man in self-improvement in the movement toward God. And in this incarnation of the God, in in following them, in following this path, the external aspects of religion, the institutions of the church, and the theological doctrines are less important than the inner existence of Christianity. Spiritual exercises, curbing one's egos and cultivating love for people. But the philosophy of Soloviev, sorry, but the philosophy of Soloviev's unitotality and Jung's deep psychology followed the same path, hoping to preserve Christianity as the basis for Western civilization and the basis for uh, hoping that's hoping to preserve Christianity as the basis of Western civilization and the basic element of the Western tradition again. Okay. Whew. I need some help now. So I hope you folks have started to comment because I am losing it. Okay, so Archiphanes says that this quote um, came from the merchant um, of Venice and Havamal, the wisdom of the High One. Quote, all that glistens is not gold. Often have you heard that told, but had you been as wise as bold, young in limbs, in judgment old, your answer had not been and had not been enscrolled. Okay. Woo. Okay. I just have to take a break for a minute. I'm sorry. Uh, or one of you needs to come join me here and help me with the reading. Uh, hmm, okay. Anyway, we were in the new No Kings rally yesterday, and let me see if any of our No Kings signs made it um, to my computer at this point. It'll be interesting. Closing in on it, it seems. However, it might not be here. Let's see. Ah, I did find it. So anyway, here is the Conover clan participating in um, yesterday's rally. This is my wife, Debbie. Let's just try loving kindness for a change. Amen. That's a traditional idea of Tibetan Buddhism. And I guess there were a lot of folks there, several hundred, uh, at a shopping mall. This was my favorite one uh, because this is a skeleton, and here lies free speech, 1791 to 2025 question mark. Here lies justice, democracy. Here lies democracy. U.S. Constitution, rest in peace. With question marks about these. Here lies liberty. Here lies equality. Very good. And I learned that the skeleton is a fellow school teacher. Let's see. And then we had a unicorn there. Everybody was having fun. Uh, and then there were this march along the road, and lots of beeping, lots of beeping. Um, and Deb really liked this. I am Grantifa, defending my grandkids' rights. And Grantifa love fiercely resists louder, uh, yeah, resists louder, no kings. Okay. Um, I guess that's it. This is my latest painting. which I am calling The 6 Million Year Old Man. I'm only about halfway through it, but the 6 million year old man is the sum total of our psyches, um, which we represent at this point in time. I'm only about halfway into this painting, however. Uh, you can get a sense of it, but I had painted a white fluorescent center, and then I saw some variegation, so I decided to line that. And when I did, this six million year old man emerged, and you can either use this is his eye, or this is his eye, or maybe even this is his eye, and here's his nose and his chin, and he's looking off into the future. Uh, that's the gist of that. Um, okay, let me get rid of that on the screen. Um, okay, let's see. Mela asks if that's um, Santa Barbara, California, and no, it's Crofton, Maryland. If you were asking about the the demonstration that I attended, which was near Annapolis, where I live. Uh, and Kathy says, Skip, have you read the this morning's reading before? What do you think of it? Well, I have read it, and so um, here you can see my copy of it is heavily marked up. And what I think is that this is a very interesting, it's an interesting cut on history, uh, a lot of stuff which I didn't think of before. And so the next section is called The Eternal Feminine. That too will be interesting. I'm just trying to uh, focus my eyes somewhere else because it's putting me to sleep. But anyway, um, uh, yeah, Kathy says 6 million years is a whole lot of collective psyche, but the reason I use that title is because that is also a title of um, that Jung used, the 6 million year old man. And actually, probably it's much, it's way longer than that. As you know from the eternal moment, um, we are the sum total of everything that's come together in millions and millions of years, tens of millions of years, since humanity has existed. Um, but anyway, as far as the demonstration yesterday, no, I did not see any terrorists, uh, and and it was quite peaceful, and so that's the way we want it. And Deborah says, I had a dream last night, was in a commercial aircraft, and it was approaching for landing. Then it started veering to the right, and it was going in circles, threatening to crash, but it didn't. I left the plane and was watching from above. Now it makes sense about veering to the right in politics and the No Kings movement. Anyway, it just occurred to me now what the meaning is. Interesting. I too had a dream last night, and I part of it was in a strange camp, and and there were these long halls in this camp um, that were covered with nothing, and people are just uh, not thinking. Uh, and Richard says, six is the number of man in biblical terms. Well, that's interesting. Um, I don't recall that at all. Um, okay, I guess I'm awake again. Let's see if we can get through this next section. Uh, and this is sure to spur some conversation because it's the eternal feminine. Um, and there's the Dionysian element. Oh my God. Oh my goodness. All right. I will try to get through the eternal feminine or see what thought I saw a new page, new title. Nope, it's pretty long. All right. I will do my best to get through the eternal feminine in this article. And Archifaunus, like you, I didn't dream for years, and then I started to dream again occasionally, not so often, but um, and Archifaunus is very interesting. Says six electrons, six protons, and neutron equals carbon equals man. Uh, and Deborah says, Melissa, that seems frightening, Deb. Did you awaken from it abruptly, or was it a sleep paralysis type of nightmare? And Deb says, no, it was very peaceful, Amela. I had a strong feeling that things were going to be all right. And now it makes sense. And Amela says, Kathy, there are plenty of books on spiritual numerology. Someone donate from such books on Christian Judaic mysticism and New Age spirituality to the donate a book box. The 6 day God created man. Okay, Richard says on the 6th day God created man. One other point that I would make is that I don't think Jung was quite there. I mean, he did talk about um, the unconscious and the conscious mind, uh, and uh, and the other thing he talked about was rationality versus irrationality. And it occurs to me that that's kind of the ultimate duality. In other words, we, some of you know that a year ago I painted a picture of it, the ultimate duality, because, um, well, let me show you one thing that most of you will remember this picture, but it once again makes the point. Okay, so here is from the Galileo spacecraft. This photograph was taken on July the 19th, I believe, in 2013. And astronomer named Carolyn Porco decided to execute a turn with the Galileo spacecraft to get a picture of Earth. And so you see in this picture um, a pale blue dot, and that is us. And everything, all the creations of not only man, but every creature. I mean, think of beaver houses and all sorts of other things that might be creations. And yet, in the irrational universe, we get magnificence. Okay, that's the essence of the painting. And so religion is on the side of irrationality. It's not provable. So many people talk about having faith that it's true, but I think it's knowable. And so like Jung, uh, I think it I think the magnificence of the universe and everything about it um, is knowable to the extent that God exists and speaks to us in mysterious ways. Um, okay. If I can find my painting, which was just this incredible aha moment for me. But I might be able to find it if I go back to, I think it was about December of last year, something like that. Um, just trying to get back to it. All my pictures, etc. Working up to it. Oh, there it is. Great. Okay, I got it. So here it is. And this is called Treks to Nowhere Through Magnificence. And the tracks that you see and everything that looks structural in this painting represents all the works of man. Uh, and so I entitled this painting Tracks to Nowhere Through Magnificence, because the tracks on this image simply end. They don't go anywhere. And if you if you consider the Saturn painting or the Saturn photograph, that's the point, that everything, all the works of man are like something going nowhere because it's all on the pale blue dot in that photograph. And and yet the universe itself is magnificent, and everything that's in the universe is magnificent. And so you can see our very small contribution to that. And anyway, that's the point. I hope that's meaningful to you. I don't know that it's very meaningful to me. I painted that picture in an hour and a half one day, and I just said, "Oh my God, this is it. This is what Jung was talking about." Yeah. Okay. 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 So Kathy refers to 666, which of course is a symbol of the devil. And then Arcaphanes said, "This is the star of Remphan, the image of their god." Okay, I don't know what that is. And Deborah says the sixth chakra is in the position of Christ, the place of forgiveness at the point of the optic crossing. After that is the seventh chakra of self realization at the top of the head. And yeah, and Kathy's talking about duality and potentiality. I think, the point really is that we live in all kinds of dualities. And it's like being, on the tips of the horns of a bull. It it's it's my train of thought. Uh, Um, Deborah says, Christ didn't ask us to worship him. It was telling us the kingdom of heaven is within you, but forgiveness is and Deborah, but forgiveness is the place of the crossing into the next stage. Anyway, something to consider. And Archiponus says, yet sparks have caught fire, ashes rekindled within man. And yeah, so I don't blame you for having to go endeavor. It's 2 a.m. where you are, but here it's 11:20, and um, in the morning, and I'm still losing it. And Amela says, do you remember that type when the Prince of Saudi Arabia invited Trump in his first term to see this giant transparent blue sphere? Yep, I remember that. And okay, so Amela's even got the date, which was May 22nd, 2017. I fully recall that. All right. Okay, so now I'm going to read about the eternal feminine. The central symbol of Solovyov's teachings and his followers is Sophia, the wisdom of God. This entire school of philosophy is called Sophiology, although different authors have had significant disagreements with respect to the understanding of Sophia. they created an organization akin to religious orders in Catholicism. The absence of a tradition of such orders in Orthodoxy was felt by them as a hindrance to the development of Orthodox theology and philosophy. The first attempts to establish the Brotherhood of St. Sophia occurred immediately after the Revolution in 1919, but regular meetings became possible only in emigration, and later after 2024 to 1946, and lasted from 1924 to 1944. The idea was initially approved by the Russian Patriarch, but later in the emerging church milieu, the Brotherhood was tried for heresy. The meetings would begin with a special prayer to Saint Sophia. The Brotherhood brought together not only a number of clerics who had a talent for theology, but also secular philosophers and former politicians. The head of the Brotherhood was the philosopher Sergei Bulgakov, who actually entered the ministry, and Nikolai Berdyaev uh, was an active participant, despite the fact that he considered himself a personalistic and existentialist philosopher and explored the problems related to personality and freedom. Philosophy literally means love of Sophia or wisdom, uh, and that's philo for love, and Sophie in Greek, Sophie for wisdom. And Vladimir Solovyov, uh, wisdom and wholeness, or the unitotality he sought, as was embodied in the feminine image of Sophia, because the feminine principle is accepting and unifying. The concept of the world soul, anima mundi of Plato, the living and intelligent principle that permeates all the phenomena of the world, merged for Solovyov with the Christian notion of Saint Sophia, the wisdom of God. On a personal level, a beloved woman as a source of inspiration can become the embodiment of Sophia. In the poem Three Meetings, he recounts his experience of such personifications of Sophia in Moscow, London, and Egypt. From his story, it is not entirely clear whether he means by this a poetic metaphor, concrete women, or a spiritual contact with the spirit of Sophia. Later in his life, he happened to make contact with the mystically gifted journalist Anna Schmidt from Nizhny Novgorod, a perhaps mentally ill person who considered herself to be an incarnation of Sophia, and on her behalf, he wrote, quote, the Third Testament, unquote, for humanity. His example prompted many writers and creative people of the Silver Age to seek the unity of sensory experience and spiritual revelation in the male-female relationship. As a result, their personal lives became complicated by rather intricate sexual and creative unions that expressed a general modernistic impulse toward experimentation. You think? Excuse me. In this emphasis on redemptive femininity, we can see a reaction to the distortions of patriarchal culture and the emerging trend toward the emancipation of women and the strengthening of their role in society. On the other hand, the demand for the creation of national ideologies in connection with the political repartition of Europe in the early 20th century led to the turn toward the old Russian and common Slavic roots. Patrifocality, the dominance of the maternal figure, matrifocality, was always, according to a number of scholars, characteristic of the Russian mentality. According to Orthodox believers, Russia is under the special protection of the Mother of God. This is reflected in Orthodox icons, where the image of the Mother of God is popular. On this basis, some psychoanalysts believe in the prevalence of pre-Oedipal neuroses in the psyche of Russians. Okay. On this basis, some psychoanalysts believe in the prevalence of pre-Oedipal neuroses in the psyche of Russians. The achievement of women over men is part related to the consequences of war, revolutions, and reprisals of the 20th century, which reduced the male population primarily. In Soloveyev's teachings, Saint Sophia receives the designation of the eternal feminine and merges with the images of the Mother of God. The figure of Sophia is already mentioned in the Bible. She is understood as an active creative principle of God involved in the creation of the world. Sometimes she is identified with the Holy Spirit, sometimes with the word coming from the Creator's mouth, sometimes with the matter of the world in the sense of the womb or matrix from which everything originated. In Constantinople, the capital of the Byzantine Empire, the famous giant temple in honor of Saint Sophia was built. This is the Hagia Sophia in Istanbul. However, Sophia is identified there with Christ, Logos, as an embodiment of divine wisdom. In the, I guess it's mansplaining, obviously. In Orthodox iconography, these representations of Sophia as Christ, as Jesus, alternate with images of her as the dove of Holy Spirit and with an androgynous angel-like creature. The latter image is present on the famous icon Sophia created a house for herself, where it unites Jesus, the Mother of God, John the Baptist, all saints and apostles, the church and the worshipers, and heaven and earth. In fact, Sophia forms the center of the circle, the mandala, which emphasizes the cosmogonic aspects of this symbol. Now, this essay has two images with it, but I think they're um, too too lightly printed to mean much to you. But there's an image of Sophia sitting on a central throne, and then there's an image of a Trinity with the three angels being hosted by Abraham of Mamre. See how far I have to go with my voice. I'm going to try. According to some scholars, the most famous icon by Andrei Rublev, uh, Trinity 1411, which depicts the three angels around a table, um, is actually dedicated to Saint Sophia, both because of the circle in which the figures are inscribed and because at the center of the circle there is a cup or grail, a feminine symbol. And that would be this one. You can see the grail at the center, and the whole thing is in a circle. In the Russian tradition, most often Sophia was understood and portrayed as the mother of God, who, being a virgin, that is, a holy or perfect human being, is the goal of all spiritual quests. The emphasis is placed on the mother of God and not on the historical Virgin Mary as venerated in Catholicism. This maternal image resonated with the Platonic soul of the world, Anima Mundi, and the pagan great goddesses of the Slavic pantheon. It was to Saint Sophia that the largest temples in Novgorod and Kiev, which were built after the adoption of Christianity in Russia, were dedicated. Okay. In the uh, transitional period from paganism to Christianity, the image of Sophia's universal divine wisdom was more understandable to people than the evangelical story of Jesus, which has many specific Middle Eastern details. This provided an opportunity for some Russian thinkers to consider Sophia Mary as a fourth principle in the divinity, and even to proclaim this symbol to be the basis for the renewal of Russian orthodoxy and Russian national identity. We do not know whether this doctrine, popular with Russian symbolists, of which Jung could not have been unaware because of his relationship with Emil Meitner, influenced Jung's fascination with the idea of quaternity as a symbol of wholeness and his reflection on the place of the Virgin Mary as the fourth principle in the Trinity. The significance of this concept is evidenced by the enthusiasm with which Jung and his students received the Pope's proclamation of the dogma of the Assumption of the Virgin Mary in 1950. The subsequent strengthening of Mariology in Catholicism and actively supported by the Slavic Pope John Paul II in the second half of the 20th century, confirms Jung's prediction regarding the evolution of Christian doctrine in the direction of recognizing the importance of the feminine. In the Red Book, written long before Jung's most important works devoted to Christianity, we encounter several female images. The most important is the image of Salome, who accompanies the prophet Elijah. Later, this couple is transformed into an old scientist who keeps his blonde daughter locked up in a tower. Jung understands the biblical story of John the Baptist and Salome as a story of meeting of spirit and instinct that had drawn to each other in a quest for wholeness, although they are in the irreconcilable conflict. Perhaps one can detect a hint at Lou Andreas Salome's of a femme fatale who was Nietzsche's Russian-German muse, and as well as Freud's apprentice and the first female psychoanalyst and thus managed to embody the common enema of Nietzscheism and psychoanalysis. The Red Book was created in part as Jung's response to Nietzsche and his thesis, God is Dead, and the proclamation of the will to power and the Superman as key trends of the new time. In addition, while creating his own psychology, Jung sought to create an alternative to Freud and his influence. Finally, he himself experienced a confrontation with his Russian Jewish anima in the person of Sabine Spielrein before the years of writing the Red Book. The problematic relationship between a woman and a hero on his way, excuse me, beg your pardon. Sorry. Definitely experiencing a allergenic response at the moment. Okay. The problematic relationship between a woman and a hero on his way are mentioned by Jung in the references to the couples Faust and Gretchen and Parsifal and Kundry. Only in the final chapters of the Red Book do we see a harmonious union of man and woman in the elderly Philemon and Bacchus. This reconciliation with the anima is preceded by long conversations with his soul, where she appears both in a female form and in the images of a bird and a snake. On the whole, the Red Book is a masculine piece of work centered on a main male character who is looking for a masculine image of the self, in contrast to the search of the Russian thinkers who sought contact with the self as the eternal feminine. Uh, that seems an important point. But Jung's theory and Russian sociology have common origins apart from Christianity and Platonism. They include the Gnostic treatises of early Christianity, in which the mythology of Sophia, including the highest and lowest Sophia, Achamoth, who gave birth to the evil demiurge, Yaldabaoth, is developed. Gnostic teaching Gnostic teachings emerged during the crisis period of transition from pagan antiquity to Christian monotheism. During this period of active spiritual creativity, not yet constrained by the rigid frames of the canon and dogma, every stratum of society in every country sought its formula for a new faith best suited to its cultural unconscious. Many educated people from priestly circles claimed a more esoteric and more secret version of religion, combining Christian eschatology and ethics with elements of ancient cosmogony, astrology, magic, and healing. Gnosticism, which inspired both Jung and the Russian philosophers, gives us living evidence of individuation in and through religious activities. Another source common to Jungian psychology and Russian sociology lies in the various mystical teachings of the Middle Ages, among which it is worth mentioning the works of the German visionary Jacob Bohm. Bohm is cited many times in Jung's published writings and in the Red Book. Nikolai Berdyaev especially appreciated Bohm and considered himself his successor. It is possible that it is in Bohm's concept that the abyss, Ungrund, uh, as the dark, irrational, unified basis of everything that one must look for the origins of Jung's concepts of the unconscious. Bohm understood Sophia as the ideal, pure spiritual prototype of the human, calling her eternal virginity or and virgin wisdom. Bohm is considered one of the founders of Western Theosophy and the highest authority in the Hermetic and occult traditions. Bohm's works were translated into Russian rather early. Many figures of the Silver Age were Freemasons who considered themselves to be who, cons- who considered themselves to be followers of Bohm's teachings. Bohm's method, which was the immersion in vision, inspired by the desire to comprehend Sophia, divine wisdom, can be considered a precursor to both Vladimir Solovyev's dates with Sophia and the Jung's method of active imagination. In turn, Jung's development of the psychological concept of anima helped Russian philosophers in comprehending Sophia as it is added scientific and I'm going to try to read this last sentence again. I'm again hypnotizing myself, so it's kind of difficult sometimes. Okay, in turn, Jung's development of the psychological concept of anima helped Russian philosophers in comprehending Sophia as it added scientific and clinical facets on the individual psychological level. It is known that Vyacheslav Ivanov, 1866 to 1949, came to Zurich to get acquainted with Jung's works, the fruit of which was his essay, Anima, quote unquote, quote, Anima, unquote, his essay, Anima. Okay, I'm going to have to stop there for a couple of reasons. One is that um, my grantee, grantee, uh, my grand Tifa, um, my wife, wants to go out and exercise her privilege of assembly once again today. We have another assembly today, and also because I'm simply losing it. So we will continue with Lev Kagai's essay. I've been reading from Jung's Red Book for Our Time, Searching for Soul Under Postmodern Conditions, uh, edited by Mary Stein and Thomas Arst, published by Chiron. It's volume 2 of the 5-volume series. Um, look at some of your comments here. Yeah, Aquinas says Hagia Sophia, holy wisdom, wisdom of God. Yeah, absolutely. I had the privilege of visiting um, Istanbul at least once. Um, and I did go to the Hagia Sophia. And one of the most fascinating aspects of it is that it was built in 555, approximately 555 AD. And unlike Western cathedrals, which were built over a 100-year period, the Hagia Sophia was built in 5 years. And so that in itself was an absolute marvel. And I know the secret of how they did it. And they built a dome in the Hagia Sophia, which stood as the largest dome in the world for over 1,000 years until the uh, completion of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. But uh, prior to that, Hagia Sophia was the largest dome in the world. Um, and let's see. So Richard says, Mary is the wisdom of the Bible. She trusted God with very little questioning and fulfilled her mission in blind faith. Uh, Archifauna says Ein Sof is Ion Sophia, Sophia itself. Richard Mary came and corrected Eve's bad decision. She is the new Eve and eternally the mother of Christianity. Yeah, that's never going to be denied, of course. Um, and Archifaunus says Gospel of Thomas is the greatest Gnostic text. Okay, and Kimberly Helbing says, thank you, Skip. Well, thank you so much. I do think that this was an important article to read because it gave us some of the history and context of Russian thought, and it's very helpful in that respect. And so I hope that this was useful to you today. Um, I do have to depart at this time, so I'm just going to apologize and say, peace be with you. And I'll see you next week. We'll finish this essay and maybe begin the next one because there's not much much more, but there is a bit more to read. Um, and so I will excuse myself at this point and sign off, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next week.